Yeet has had the best 2 years any rapper can ask for. After toiling away on SoundCloud and developing a supportive but smaller fan base, he broke through in 2021 with songs like Get Busy, Turban, and Money So Big. Some people laughed off the success and called him a joke, or a fad, or a phase. But in 2023, he's proven that wrong, and he's got his first #1 song, IDGAF with Drake. Unlike the path that some other artists may take, he hasn't really abandoned his sound at all or moved in a more mainstream direction. He's stayed true to the sound that he broke out with, and in a true test of fanbase strength, he's had some really successful tours. There's a popular video essay on YouTube on Yeet's rise from a channel called 1111, and it does a great job summing up of how he got here today. The video is great, but what really stuck out to me is the title, How Yeet Escaped the Underground. There's also a video from 2022 listing the top 10 best underground music videos from a channel called Saint Clout, and of course Yeet makes an appearance. So I started to think to myself, what does it mean to be underground? I think right now my channel is at underground size on YouTube, so if you would be so kind to throw a like and a subscribe, I would really appreciate it. For real though, you guys have been so supportive, and I'm not even gonna do like the X% of watchers haven't subscribed thing, because like I'm so new that I haven't even really looked at my analytics yet, but like that's how early you are right now. So if you want to smack that subscribe button, like I would really appreciate it so much. Alright, back to the video. You see, sometimes words and phrases become so common that none of us really think about what they mean anymore. So I went looking for a definition of underground music, and I found some definitions of the utmost journalistic integrity. Wikipedia and a 10-year-old Reddit thread. Wikipedia calls it music with practices that are perceived as outside or somehow opposed to mainstream popular music culture. The Reddit thread was created more with like bands in mind, and the most popular comment had 3 tiers: mainstream popular music, alternative popular music, and underground music. And to determine who goes where, they were basing it on genre, where they can tour, or how many CDs and vinyl they've sold, or maybe if they've ever charted before. In the internet hip-hop world that Yeet came from, with fellow rappers like Summers and Autumn, people like to refer to that scene as the underground. Sometimes Playboi Carti's Opium label signees like Ken Carson, Destroy Lonely, and Homicide Gang get grouped into that underground pocket as well. Although if you ask Destroy Lonely, he's not too happy about being called underground. In a Complex interview, he said, "Underground rap don't mean nothing to me at all. I actually despise that word. I don't like anything that puts music in a box, or even an artist. I'm gonna keep saying this shit, bro. In 2023, you can't say that somebody is lesser than anything, because we've all got the same phones, the same internet. There's no mainstream or underground. It is just, do you exist or not? In the real world though, not on the phone." And I think I understand where Lone is coming from here. All the songs in the world, be them from Drake or your next door neighbor, drop onto the internet and everybody can just stream what they want. Someone in the Reddit thread said something along the same lines. The term underground has lost its meaning post-internet, since we can all log on and find whatever music we want. And that comment is 10 years old. I feel like that's only gotten more and more true. But I think we need to take a second to think about what underground meant pre-internet music. Like I've talked about in a few videos now, before the internet, you had to go and physically buy the music you wanted to listen to, whether that was CD, vinyl, cassette, or whatever player you had in your house. To get your CD or vinyl put in a store, you had to have it physically produced and distributed. Being signed to a major label or even an indie label back then made that hundreds of times easier. Before the internet, the only other place you can sell your music besides like record stores was at shows. Of course, selling your recorded music yourself was still a profitable business for some people. Ludacris sold over 50,000 copies of his first independently distributed album out of the trunk of his car. I think it's pretty clear that when Ludacris was doing that, he was underground. But the funny thing is, that same year, he was discovered and signed to Def Jam, and 2 years later they repackaged almost the exact same album and called that his debut album back for the first time. It went 3 times platinum. And you know what's funny? Destroy Lonely's dad was featured on a bunch of songs on it. He's a rapper named I-20. Small world, huh? Looking at Ludacris as an example, the exact same music that was once called or considered underground can still become a smash hit and go platinum and be crazy huge. So I guess in this case, the term underground didn't really refer to the kind of music that it was, but to its form of distribution and the way that it was sent out to the world. I don't think that's the case with the rappers that we look at today that people call the underground, you know, the Yeats, the Summers, the Destroy Lonelys, all these guys, right? That music is called underground because of how it sounds or the aesthetics that go along with it, not because of its distribution method. In fact, if we look at the situations of many of these artists, they're signed to major labels. In the case of Playboi Carti's Opium roster, both Ken Carson and Destroy Lonely are signed to Interscope through Opium. Summers was once signed to Victor Victor, which is a part of Universal. Yeet is signed to Geffen Records through Field Trip. Well, maybe one would argue that these artists have graduated from the underground, And in some of their cases, that's probably true. When they were first buzzing on SoundCloud or on the internet, like they weren't signed to a label. There are artists now, like Jace, who people would probably say are underground, but are totally signed to major labels. Jace is signed to Geffen just like Yeet is. And there's a Reddit thread from like a month ago that's asking if he's gonna be next out of the underground. So whether it's true or not, there are a lot of people who consider him to be underground. Even some of the newer artists that are gaining momentum in this world are signed to major labels too. Osama's son, according to the byline of one of his songs, is signed to Atlantic Records. And to be clear, I'm not saying that this means they can't be underground. My job in this video is not to decide what or who is technically underground. It's to look at all the different ways that different people use the word and to try to figure out what it actually means. At the end of the day, words can mean whatever we want them to, or it really just however society wants them to mean. Not to go like linguist nerd, right? But it's like in 2012, if I said that's cap, people would be like, what do you mean? It's a hat, right? But now if I say that's cap, people know exactly what I'm talking about. So back to music, at one point, underground meant that you were outside of the major label system. Today, I'm not sure that that's automatically the case. In this pocket of hip hop, underground almost refers to like a kind of genre or a style of an artist or even an aesthetic rather than their form of distribution. So I figured to get a little more clarity and some other opinions on it, I would go on one of my favorite music forums, KTT2, and ask the people what they thought underground meant. One guy said below 5,000 streams on Spotify. I don't think that's true because I know people who like aren't even really musicians anymore who have over 5,000 streams on Spotify. So if they're not underground, I'm not sure anyone isn't underground. One of my favorite posters on there, Sherm, shout out Sherm if you're watching this, made a great point that I think I agree with. Underground doesn't simply mean underexposed or unpopular. Take, for example, like an imaginary pop artist, like a TikTok pop artist who's making like It's Me or the PS5 like kind of music, but they haven't blown up yet, right? They're getting 100 likes on their TikToks. They have no traction, but I wouldn't call them underground. They don't suddenly get put in the box of like Jedi Mind Tricks or Immortal Technique or these like conscious underground battle rap dudes, you know? Like, it's not just a popularity contest, it's a whole thing, it's a whole package. That's what I'm trying to figure out here. Another great KTT poster named Bernie X acknowledged that the concept of underground music used to feel more solidified in the early 2010s, during what many might call the blog era. Also, random plug, but if you haven't listened to the blog era podcast, I feel like you would love it if you're watching this video and you made it this far, so yeah. And I think I agree with Bernie on this one. I think back to rappers whose music I would find on blogs like Two Dope Boys, or a little bit later like Pigeons and Planes, and I would go download their mixtapes. Growing up in New York City, I could go see them live. They might be playing at SOBs or something like that. Then I went to college in Philly, where I had the opportunity to see a bunch of shows too. But at the same time, I would have never expected to hear some of these artists on Power 105.1 or on Hot 97, or to see them like doing an interview on The Breakfast Club. They were selling some merch, and I'm sure they were making some kind of a career, but they were eschewing, how do you say that word? Eschewing? Eschewing. They were eschewing the mainstream music distribution format, at least early on. And at that time, I don't think that necessarily made you underground, because like I would say that Chance the Rapper in 2016 was definitely not underground, but to a lot of people, since he wasn't signed to a major label, he was independent, right? So independent doesn't necessarily mean underground either. Another poster said if you're not signed to a label and your shows are about 20 people or less, then you're underground. Humble brag, but that would mean I'm not underground because my shows have been bigger than that. And speaking of, if you live in Seattle or Portland, I'm going on tour with Shy High. So Seattle, February 10th, Portland, February 11th. I would love to see you guys there. It's going to be a blast. I got tickets in the description. See you there. All right, so one guy also said if it doesn't go gold, it's underground. I think I wholeheartedly disagree with that. But look at the wide range of responses here. One guy said over 5,000 streams means it's not underground. Another guy says if it doesn't go gold, that means it's still underground. To go gold on streaming would be something between 625 million to almost 2 billion streams, depending on whether or not they're paid or free streams. I think what this proves is that one, quantifying underground by numbers is very difficult. And two, we have such a wide frame of reference for what this term could mean. It's a pretty commonly used music term, but at the same time, nobody really has the same definition of it. And I'm not saying anybody is right or wrong, but just look at how far apart we are on what this word means. And honestly, the more I thought about that, the more that I think it actually kind of makes sense that we have different definitions of it. Let's think about what the word underground actually means. Not in a music context, like just the word underground. It means beneath the surface of the ground. And what's beneath the surface is going to depend on what surface you're standing on. So if you're evaluating music solely on popularity based on like mainstream crossover ability, like it'll get played on the radio or at a sporting event, or like if you're in the car with your parents, you can leave it on and not feel awkward and skip it, then maybe rappers like Summers or Yeet kind of are underground in that sense. People who aren't in the know might kind of be like, what is this? But if we're looking at streaming numbers, it's hard to say that either of them are really that underground. Summers has almost 1 million monthly listeners, which if you see my video, I don't love that stat, but it is what it is. It might not be mainstream, but it's hard to call that underground. Going back to that one comment on that Reddit thread, there was a tier between mainstream and underground called alternative popular music. This is how they describe that category. It has less broad appeal, sometimes sticks its head in the charts, and tends to be closer to or at the cutting edge, often less popular genres. Most likely able to make a living out of making music. Headline or support at large or mid-sized venues. Plays at festivals. I think those conditions fit pretty well with the underground rap scene that we're describing in this video. However, the word alternative has seen its definition change so much over the years. It began as a term to describe music that was outside of the mainstream, but it's taken on its own meaning as a bunch of different genres, be it alternative rock, alternative R&B, alternative pop, or alternative hip hop. It's no longer really used as an example of popularity or a signifier that the artist is outside of the mainstream. Look at the This Is Alt playlist on Spotify. Green Day and The Killers are definitely mainstream bands. Alternative R&B began as a legitimate new wave of music when artists like Frank Ocean, The Weeknd, and SZA were blog darlings and not chart toppers. But the times have changed, and I would say that alternative R&B sound is just as mainstream, if not more, than the traditional R&B sound. Spotify's alternative hip-hop playlist, I think, is a little bit closer to the original meaning of what alternative meant. But at the same time, there's a Fred Again and Baby Keem song on there, and I don't really think that would qualify as outside of the mainstream in 2023, almost 2024. I guess when this video comes out, 2024. That's definitely mainstream, right? Doing this makes me think that the term alternative might need a deeper dive. I don't know. Let me know in the comments if you would want to see that video. So in conclusion, the word underground will change its definition based on what ground you're standing on. Some purists will say that for an artist to truly be underground, they have to be foregoing the traditional paths of releasing music. Maybe keeping their music off streaming, where artists are paid pennies, only selling some music at shows, or maybe just keeping it on Bandcamp or something. Perhaps these artists will have a deeper reason for that. Music that's really like pushing for change or going counter to the capitalist culture that we live in. Some people would say that underground refers to the size of an artist's audience, or the ability for that artist's sound to cross over into the mainstream. Although neither of those feel fully right to me. Like we said before, underground shouldn't mean undiscovered or underappreciated. And in terms of the sound argument, look at Yeet. 2 years ago, we'd be calling that sound impossible to cross over into the mainstream. And now he's got Drake on those beats, and they're playing that at like every NBA game ever. Evaluating an artist's position based on streaming data, sales, or touring size is tough because those numbers vary so much based on different factors like genre, where the artist is from, and just their like propensity to tour and what their live show looks like. I think at the end of the day, underground is a badge that people can assign to their favorite artist, or maybe an artist can assign to themselves, and just kind of apply it as it sees fit, because none of us really have the same definition. And I'm not sure that there is a right definition. It all just depends on what ground you're standing on.